This episode is all about death, and to be frank, it's a little self-indulgent as I just got back from a family funeral, but if you're okay with that, it's a pretty interesting chat. Hello and welcome to the Political Orphanage, a home for misfits, wanderers, the living, and possibly the dead. We don't know how good the Wi-Fi is on the other side. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton. And I am also a big fan of Sebastian Junger. He's a decorated war correspondent and a fairly famous writer. He wrote The Perfect Storm, which was adapted into a film some years ago. But I'm a particularly big fan of his book, Tribes on Coming Home and Belonging, which has played a significant role in my assessment of how both people and politics work. For that reason, he was one of the very first guests I sought out on this program now more than 5 years ago. You can find a link to our initial interview in today's show notes. And I was going to interview him about a book he wrote on freedom and the nature thereof, which seems pertinent to this program, except that he died. Or technically, he almost died. In the course of a day, I believe he lost 10 pints of blood, which is all the blood. He lost all the blood on the human body, and then was able to barely survive through a number of medical miracles and medical technology and doctors and blood transfusions. We will hear from Mr. Junger in a bit and what it's like to be on the precipice of death, which, as a teaser, is particularly interesting to me given that Mr. Junger is an atheist. And on his deathbed, his dad came to talk to him, and this is the part I really wanted to discuss with him. His dad died 8 years earlier. And apparently he was an atheist too. So there's a lot of a friendly agnostic talking to a friendly atheist about trying to piece a mystical experience together on today's program. Now, on my end, just a day or two after I interviewed Mr. Junger, my uncle died. And I don't want to elaborate on that too much right now, maybe later. My family is fine, thank you. But death is kind of on my mind at the moment. I'm kind of thinking about this. So this week is, I think, a very interesting interview with a really interesting guy about death and a full-on 100% reprieve from the world of politics. If you are just here for politics, which would make a lot of sense given that it's called the Political Orphanage, you could skip this episode. You will miss zero substantive political analysis this week, and we will return to that next week. But if you don't mind indulging me in a little bit of chat about near-death experiences, this is a fun ride. My guest today is Sebastian Junger. He is a journalist and former war correspondent. He is the author of The Perfect Storm, which I imagine a lot of you saw on film back when it came out. And he is also the author of an incredible book that I really love called Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging, which I quote liberally in my own book on tribalism. He's written a book called Freedom, which is probably the most pertinent to the show, but we're actually going to skip over that because he recently very nearly died hard and wrote a book called In My Time of Dying, How I Came Face to Face with the Idea of the Afterlife. Welcome, Sebastian.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
As I said, I'm a very big fan of yours. I'm delighted you're here, and I'm glad you're not dead. So just right off the bat, this is a good day for me.
Thank you.
Well, so I'm curious to talk to you about this experience. You're a journalist. I think you're an atheist, so you've got an interesting viewpoint on all of this. Before we get into everything, what happened? I feel like we do need to set the stage of what exactly occurred before anything else makes sense in today's conversation.
Yeah, well, sort of very briefly, I was a war reporter for a long time and many years, and I came a few times, came very close to losing my life. And after my friend and colleague Tim Hetherington was killed in Libya, I stopped war reporting. I got married. I had children. I felt like I'd kind of slid into home base in terms of my life and not risking death all the time, right? And that was actually it was exactly then that I actually almost died. I had an undiagnosed aneurysm, an unnatural ballooning of an artery in my pancreatic artery in my abdomen. And aneurysms it's not like plaque and high cholesterol and, it's not a lifestyle issue. You can be super healthy as I am and fit and whatever. And still have an aneurysm. It's a sort of freakish structural thing. And they grow over decades, over an entire lifetime. And when they rupture, it's almost a death sentence. I mean, you're bleeding out into your own abdomen. It's not like a knife wound where the doctors know where to put their finger to plug the leak. You're bleeding internally, losing a massive amount of blood, and the logistics of doctors getting to where that leak is and plugging it are so the logistics are so daunting that most people die. And I came very, very close. I came probably within 10 minutes of actually dying. I was at the very, very end of my life. I was on the threshold, still conscious, still conversing with the doctors, but I suddenly started feeling my body going. And I was getting pulled into this, it felt like I was getting pulled into this black pit. It was like the universe had cracked open and infinity was sort of pulling me in. And I was terrified of it. I had no idea I was dying, but I was terrified of what was happening. And the doctor was working to transfuse me through my jugular. He was sticking a needle through my neck into my jugular to transfuse me. And as the pit opened up, I started panicking. And then my dead father, who'd been dead 8 years and was a physicist and an atheist like myself, he appeared above me. And he communicated to me, it's okay, you don't have to fight it. You can come with me, I'll take care of you. And I said, I was so horrified by that. I was like, go with you? You're dead. I'm alive. Why would I go with you? The party's over here. Like, get lost, Dad, right?
It's almost offensive. He's being rude.
It was. I was mortified. And I said to the doctor, you got to hurry. I'm going right now. And then many, many hours later, I woke up in the ICU.
Wow. Okay. So first of all, I read your book over the last couple of days, and I think that it frightened me more than most Stephen King novels. Like, Stephen King novels are numinously terrifying, whereas your book really drives home how delicate, transient, and random life is. And so, like, set it down and went and jogged for half an hour. Was like, all right, I'm going to buy an extra day on this one. Okay, so you nearly died. You were or are an atheist, because I feel like seeing or experiencing the specter of your father would, if that happened to me, it would challenge a lot of my preconditions. So are you like Lutheran now? And like you had your road to Damascus moment? You decided God exists? Like what's happening?
No, I'm definitely an atheist. I mean, I didn't see God. I saw my father. And what it did do was make me wonder if we really understand reality in physical terms, right? If our physicists, our scientists actually understand reality and understand what life and death and consciousness are. So it maybe, gave me a lot of questions, but it didn't give any answers. God is an answer, right? And it's an answer to a story. I mean, it's an answer to a question that basically is a story, a comforting story, right? Like, who are we? What are we doing here? What happens when we die? Well, I'll tell you a story that will answer all of that. There's a God. He created you. He created the universe. And when you die, God's going to take care of you. That's a story. It's not an explanation for the physical reality that we experience. And so what I was looking for afterwards was an explanation, because NDEs, as they're called, near-death experiences, are very, very common. And one of the most common experiences in NDEs is that the dead show up to welcome the dying. And it happens in hospice nurses will tell you, and ER doctors, and it happened to me, soldiers who have almost died on the battlefield. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary. Around the world, different cultures throughout history, that is one of the most common features of an NDE. And it does make me sort of wonder, like, maybe we don't understand reality. Maybe we actually don't understand death.
I think entirely possible. So in a much, 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 much less profound version of what you went through, about 8 years ago, I got drunk and watched a video on dog psychology. And bear with me, as I'm watching this video on dog psychology, they're talking about how dogs have really low-level geographic spatial memory. Like from moment to moment, their short-term spatial memory is not very good. and they don't have, they can sort of remember a relationship between two objects at once, but not three, which is why a dog understands that he's connected to you with a leash, but he doesn't understand he can wrap around a tree. That's too many data points for a dog to comprehend. And it made me, as I came out of my fog, I went, if you could talk to a dog in English and say, what is it like to have this stunted understanding of the universe? I think the dog would go, what are you talking about? I see the universe exactly as it is, which is how we feel as humans, is we have perfect clarity of what's going on, and we wouldn't know it otherwise. So I think you might be right about that there might be stuff that is, 15th dimension that we just can't see.
Yeah, and that's what happened. And there is, by the way, a dog behind you on the couch just as long as...
Yeah, that's Wallace.
Okay. He could hear every word. He just couldn't understand it, right? So, that's what happened 100 years ago with quantum physics. Like, we understood physics in terms of the laws that govern the macroscopic world, right? Momentum and gravity and all this stuff. And one of the most fundamental laws of the macroscopic world is that an object cannot be in two places at once. The information cannot travel faster than the speed of light. There's some really fundamental laws. At the quantum level, which means the subatomic level, all those laws that we thought were true universally go out the window. And it's a whole different set of laws, and a particle can be in two places at once. Quantum information can travel across the universe faster than the speed of light. There are things that are absolutely impossible in our understanding of the macroscopic world that are the reality at the quantum level. So 100 years ago, our minds were collectively blown by finding out something that we thought was absolutely impossible. And who knows how many more levels there are of understanding there are for us to discover. And I had the thought the other day, it's possible that that fear of death is because we don't understand what death actually is. That if we really understood what death was, it would not be frightening. And I don't know, but it occurred to me as a possibility. And that our fear of death might be fear of something that we don't understand rather than what death actually is. And there are some very plausible theories in quantum physics, and I go into this in my book, which is blessedly short. Let me just put that in there. It's a short book.
Let me hold this up. Hey, gang, I read this. I lied earlier. I said I read it over 2 days. I woke up early and I read it today. I read it in 1 day. It was not onerous, and I was able to take a jog and then read it in my backyard. It is deep and profound, but it is not onerous or overly long. So I think he's being accurate in what he tells you.
Thank you. And so the physics is just a few pages, but one of the most profound ideas that come out of that work, at the quantum work, is that the consciousness is part of the entire universe. That there is a universal.
Well, actually, can I pause you for a moment, because that was the part that I was like, I need another part of coffee, and I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to build up to the quantum level stuff.
Gotcha.
Can I put on my skeptic hat with you for a minute to go over your experience?
Yeah.
By the way, I don't like being a material atheist. It's not fun. I hope I'm wrong. So none of this is to try to destabilize any of your beliefs. It's to stress test this thing that I'm trapped in. But I'm thinking, in the book, you've got two kind of supernatural events that you talk about. You have a premonitory dream where you have like a weird night before, I think this happens, where you're above your family and they're all crying. So you seem to have a precognitive vision of your death. And at the time of your death, there's the pit and there's your father. So putting my skeptic hat on, there's this phenomenon where people will call somebody on the phone or their phone will ring and they'll pick it up and they were just thinking about their mom and it's their mom. And they'll go, I must have psychic powers because I was thinking about my mom. And that appears to be a cognitive trick that we have, because we never think, it's really weird. I was thinking about my dad, but the plumber called. We just dismiss it. So there's a sort of winnowing of it. In terms of the premonition of your dad, you're right. All the literature I've seen is that when people have near-death experiences, it's very common to see departed loved ones come. But I would imagine there's also just random hallucinations. And when they're random hallucinations, we go, well, that's clearly a hallucination. And so we sort of dismiss the two. Like one of my friends slipped into a coma during COVID and had weird hallucinations, but nobody thought it was a vision when he woke up because it was so bizarre. But if he'd had a hallucination of his departed father, I think it would have been identified as what you're describing. So could this be a cognitive trick, or do you think there actually is something more to it?
Yeah, I mean, if I occasionally had dreams of my father hovering over me, or occasionally had the illusion that he was, and then I happened to have that happen to me while I was dying, I'd be like, okay, well, but it was a completely unique and extraordinary vision, and one which is in keeping with, again, thousands and thousands of cases. What's odd is that, okay, the brain is under stress and it's evoking memories. Like, I mean, that's one of the theories, is like it's evoking memories, but that wasn't a memory of my father, right? And infants are more closely tied to their mother than their father. I mean, the sort of seminal character psychologically in most of our lives is our mother. And I didn't see my mother. My mother was still alive, right? Like, I mean, so case after case, people see the dead, and even dead people that aren't that important to them. What's my cousin from Sandusky doing here? Like that kind of thing. And it's just, it's odd. It doesn't prove anything, so you don't need a skeptic hat, because I'm not asserting anything other than it's odd. The dream that I had wasn't even a strange dream. It was a kind of inconceivable one. I dreamt that I was dead. Not that I was dying or going to die. I was dead. I was already dead. And I was above my family, and then they couldn't see or hear me. And I was in this vast space, and I was made to understand that I was sort of outbound and would never come back. And that was 36 hours before I started dying. And I never had a dream like that. I never even heard of someone having a dream where they're already dead and they're a spirit. And it was, and again, it doesn't prove anything. It was just extremely odd. And it did, again, I don't have answers, but I do now have questions. Yeah. Is it possible we don't understand the ultimate nature of reality?
Yeah. I follow you. I think I can't, neither of those I can use as like a hard and fast scientific repudiation of logical phenomenon, but they are weird, and the probability of them is odd. So, it could be that it was just a really weird dream, and it was a coincidence, and you happen to remember it because of the timing. But if you'd had it a year earlier, you wouldn't even think about it. You would have dismissed it. That's a logical possibility. With your dad, it's possible that you just hallucinated your dad, but it also is strange that you're right. It wouldn't be your mom or somebody that's still alive.
My wife, my kids, or right. People that are way more important to me than my dad. Except my dad happens to be dead. He's the most important dead person in my life, right? And and that thousands of other people have had this experience, and not under anesthesia, right? Not when they're sick, not when they're dying. Right? Like that's the dead show up for the dying. Whatever you want to make of that, that seems to be what happens. I tell a story in my book of a guy who's in his late 80s, and a hospice nurse who I interviewed was taking care of him. And in his last hours, he started talking to a woman named Barbara. And so the hospice nurse went into the kitchen to tell the wife, does the name Barbara mean anything to you? And the wife, horrifyingly, you can imagine how this hospice nurse felt, said, "Oh, Barbara was the love of his life." Of course, the hospice nurse is like, "Oh my God, what have I just done?" Right? And she said, the hospice nurse said, the wife said, that was our 19-year-old daughter. Talking to her as if she was in the room, right? And the hospice nurse said, "This happens all the time. He'll be gone within a few hours. This is what happens at the end." They start talking to the dead. And so one of the theories, I'll just play skeptic. I mean, one of the things about skepticism, and I love skepticism. I love rationality. That's my home baseball team, right? I love when they win, right? Like
very much sounds like that's where your dad, who may have visited you after death, is
exactly.
located.
Like, yeah, Dad, you of all people, right? Yeah. But But you must apply skepticism to skepticism, right? You have to be skeptical of the skeptical process also in order to be truly deeply skeptical, right? So the skeptic's explanation for seeing the dead is that we're dying, it's scary, and we project these comforting images. Oh, there's somewhere to go. Dear old dad, there he is waiting for me. And evolution somehow sort of produced this comforting reaction to this ultimately stressful moment. That sounds like a rational theory, but it's actually deeply irrational. So as we all know, evolution, Darwinism, works in this fashion, that traits and behaviors that increase your survival or your reproductive success get propagated at a higher rate into the next generation, into the gene pool, than traits that impede your survival or impede your reproduction, right? So one has to wonder, and I don't think it's an answerable question, how exactly would this work? Because you're proposing very deep neural structures that are producing believable hallucinations in the brain that make it easier to die and certainly won't help in reproduction. Those are not adaptive traits in Darwinian terms. How would that get encoded into the brain's neurology if they are actually facilitating death rather than making it more? Death's supposed to be scary because it will keep us alive,
right,
and then we can go procreate, right?
This is the classic come into the light, it's okay, like,
right.
Don't worry, we got something out there. So if that were an evolutionary feature and it were an emergent, non-supernatural process, it would be an ape screaming, go, don't die.
No,
don't
exactly.
die
Turn
really
around.
hard.
Right. Go find another mate.
Yeah.
Go for it. Like, you don't leave now, right? That's Darwinism at work. Evolution doesn't care if you're scared, right? In fact, fear is operational in our survival, right? Evolution doesn't care what you feel like when you die. Pain is to get you to do things that avoid causing pain and hurt you, right? So there's no evolutionary process that would produce a comforting hallucination on your way out. It's impossible.
Yeah, I kind of think you're right, because for a second, you do mention in the book that there's a certain logic to maybe we have a life review and a flood of just good neurochemicals to try to get us over the hump. Like, we're kind of on the edge, and it's like, all right, now's go time. Remember, you've got a family you got to take care of.
Right.
But if that were the case, you'd probably hallucinate about your living family rather than dead people.
Right. I mean, evolution would not produce a behavior that leads to a higher death rate and less reproduction. It's impossible. Like, it's mathematically impossible. That's not what evolution is.
Okay, well, you know what would be really helpful? I'm going to do some additional research after our chat. What would be really helpful to me, I would love to talk to somebody that works in hospice about, if we were making a pie chart of people on their deathbed, how much of it is random hallucinatory fodder versus apparently talking to people. So, for example, my grandfather, not when he was on his deathbed, but when he had a heart attack, and he would just hallucinate on anything stronger than Advil. And so I came to visit him, and he was kind of talking to me, and he's like, "Can you look out the window?" And I went, "Yeah." And he went, "Did I park my truck on the roof of the hospital?" And I was like, No, you didn't. And he's like, "You're sure?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then at one point he took the heart monitor off his finger because, quote, "I have to be ready in case the engines come back," end quote. So he was having an incredibly colorful, vivid time, right? So like that, he and ourselves and the nurses could dismiss as just random hallucination. It's possible that when the random hallucinations are people that are deceased, that we interpret that as something sacred. So I'd want to know what the ratio is, because if it's like 90% completely random, 10% deceased relatives, then I could go, oh, well, now we're applying a cookie cutter element to it. Whereas if it were like reversed, where it's like, nope, 90% of the time it's people talking to dead relatives, and then 10% of the time it's they parked their car on the roof.
I mean, all the people that I talked to and all the literature that I read through, I mean, the academic literature, the research literature, there was no mention of sort of random hallucinations, right? I mean, there was a few other commonalities in the visions, right? There was sometimes a tunnel, sometimes a black pit, and there was a feeling of sort of like vast union with the cosmos, which, and it's sort of like drug-like, like tripping, like, oh, we're all part of everything, So there was a little bit of that. But in terms of a hallucination of a tangible, concrete figure, it wasn't fire trucks. It wasn't giraffes, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't turtles. It wasn't even rainbows, right? It was dead people. And dead people are just not something that people hallucinate in the rest of their lives. They just don't do it, right? They don't do it on LSD. They don't do it when they have a fever. Dad showing up above you, it just it is not an experience that anyone has in any other context. And again, I had no idea was dying, and I was horrified to see him. It's not like I was projecting a comforting image either, right? Like, there are cases, quite a number of cases of dead people showing up who had died very recently, and the dying person did not know that they were dead, right? That the apparition was actually someone who had died the day before. They didn't even know that the person was dead, and there they were. Joe, what are you doing here, right? And it's just, again, it's not a proof and it's not an answer. But it does open the door for me to a plausible, rational question: do we actually understand the fundamental nature of reality and consciousness and life and death?
One of my friends has told me before that the tunnel that people see is just the byproduct of ocular neurons shutting down. Like, it's kind of a weird visual hallucination that is predictably occurring as our visual structure collapses from lack of blood or whatever. What do you make of that?
Oh yeah, the tunnel thing didn't impress me very much, because again, in the literature, you can produce that vision, that sensation, that vision, in a human centrifuge, which is what they put pilots in, fighter pilots, to get them to test them at 3Gs, 4Gs, 5Gs, whatever their experience in the $35 billion, fighter plane. Like, let's do it in a centrifuge first and see how you react. You could produce quite a lot of these phenomena hovering above the body, things like that. You can produce quite a lot of these phenomena. So for me, a lot of this stuff that's reported as NDEs is actually physical phenomena that can be reproduced in the brain through various, sort of lab techniques, basically. The one thing that catches so I'm sort of on board with the whole skeptic rationalist understanding of all this stuff, completely on board with, like, most of it. The one thing that doesn't make rational sense to me is the consistency of dying people seeing the dead. That's just the one thing. And again, it doesn't prove anything, but it's the one thing that I don't quite have an easy rational explanation for. Everything else, I feel like there kind of is a rational explanation for.
Okay. Yeah, and I suppose it could be both, right? So, like, when you look at krakens from the Middle Ages, the accounts of them, sometimes they look like these giant overturned boats, and sometimes they look like they have tentacles. And it appears that both of them were actually phenomenon. One was a whale, one was a giant squid, and no one quite knew what was going on, so they just inferred it was the same monster. And the monster technically was a chimera that didn't exist, but it was based on factual input that was just being misinterpreted.
Right.
So with your dad, there could theoretically be logical explanations for why you might have hallucinated him, although, as you note, that is a very odd probability for that to occur. What does your gut tell you? What do you think happened? Do you think it was really your dad?
I mean, in a sense, it's really my dad if I hallucinated him, because hallucinations are real phenomena. So, but was it my dad in the flesh incarnate above me? No, it would be a version of my dad it would have to be, if it was not just a hallucination, it would have to be a version of my father that could be perceived through quantum information, right? It would have to be, my dad would have to exist in some way in the quantum realm that who knew we are vulnerable to, that we are sensitive to, right? I mean, it would have to be something like that. Is that real? No, not in any macroscopic sense. It is not real, right? Likewise, I can't walk through two doorways at the same time. It's not possible in the macroscopic world. At the quantum world, equivalent phenomena are possible. So I don't know. Was it real? I mean, something definitely happened. Was it a hallucination? Maybe. Or was I granted access to something that many people are when they're dying, which is the quantum information, which is contained in the universe and contains consciousness. I mean, one of the strange things about consciousness is that it determines quantum reality, right? It's not, quantum reality isn't perceived by consciousness. Consciousness dictates what quantum reality is. And particles will act completely differently when they're being observed by a conscious being or not. And so is there an answer to your question in that strange phenomenon? Possibly.
Maybe. I think you get into this in the tail end of the book, which is where I'm so far out of my element. I don't have the listeners. If anybody's like, why doesn't Heaton bring up the Heisenberg? I don't know. The answer is I don't know. But you talk about what is it? Biocentric quantum something or other, which sounds like what you're describing. The idea that consciousness is sort of built into the universe.
Well, it's a theory, right? Exactly. And let me say that the physicists are out of their element here, right? I mean, don't think that the quantum physicists are comfortable with any of this stuff, but they keep doing tests that show the quantum world to work in impossible ways, at least ways that seem impossible to our limited human brains, in ways that make no sense according to the macroscopic world. And so they're out of their element too. I mean, and a number of them 100 years ago, as they discovered this stuff, they were basically like, this is terrifying and chilling, and maybe we should stop because we may not want to find out what we're finding out, right? So, biocentrism basically proposes that consciousness suffuses the entire universe like gravity does. So gravity is this crazy force in the universe. And we're just used to it, right? You throw a rock out the window and it falls. Well, why the hell should it fall, right? Like, we're just used to that. But really, you mean there's an invisible force that makes everything move towards the center of the nearest heavy object, and every object has this force in it, except we can't, we don't know how it works, and it's the Higgs boson is part of this, but the Higgs boson is a fleeting particle, and it affects everything in the universe, and without gravity, there would be no universe, right? And this is what you're telling me? You're high, right? Like, I don't believe you. Like, prove it. So if I asked you, how does gravity work? You would say, I have no idea, right? Like,
I do have no idea. Yeah. What are the other things?
Right.
What are the things that, yeah.
Right. But we all go through our lives knowing that it does work and abiding by the implications of gravity, right? And so, likewise with biocentrism, with consciousness, one of the theories, because consciousness determines reality at the quantum level, one of the theories is that the universe would not exist without consciousness being part of the physical makeup of the universe, just like gravity is, and that our human consciousness, this tiny little droplet of individuality that we enjoy for some decades, is actually part of a universal consciousness. We just can't know that, and we rejoin it when we die. And that was an idea that was espoused by none other than Erwin Schrödinger, who was one of the grandfathers of quantum physics, and not a flaky New Age kind of person, right? I mean, he was a serious physicist. He was like, that is the most plausible explanation for all these strange phenomena that we encounter at the quantum level. The most plausible explanation is that there is a universal consciousness, and we are a tiny expression of it.
I was listening to a podcast a few years ago that was talking about the particle versus wave phenomenon that occurs with quantum physics, and I'm going to butcher explaining this, but the scenario was, if you point if you point this particle at a particular thing, it's going to go in one of two directions, but if you click it, it'll change. And the way the guy kept describing it, I was like, I'm not a physicist, but I am a comedian, and I'm telling you, somebody's fucking with you. Like, I was listening to it, and I'm like, somebody's fucking with you, dude. Like there's somebody on the other end having a good time with this. Probably not the case, but it's very much how it struck me at the time.
Yeah. Well, I can summarize it pretty well. Not that I or anyone understands it, but the particle wave duality is that if you fire a photon at two slits in a metal plate, and if you don't observe it with a photon detector, you just let it do its thing, it will go through as a wave function, which means it goes through both slits at the same time and leaves the the corresponding signature on a strike plate on the other side. And if you observe it when you fire the photon at the two slits, it is forced to pick one slit and will only go through one slit. And then if you don't observe it, it will go through two. And it will be in two places at once. And that's because a photon is both a particle and a wave. It's both in one place and in all places all the time. And so apply that to human existence. Who knows? And if that's true, maybe it's possible that the quantum information that made up my father is capable of recoalescing in some way that's not just hallucinatory. I don't know, but it's no weirder than the double slit experiment. My father somehow did that. It's no weirder than the double slit experiment, and for that matter, it's no weirder than the universe existing in the first place. But the odds of the universe existing have been calculated because there are unbelievable nerds working in laboratories crunching numbers for us, right? So it's one chance in 10 to the minus 230, if I remember correctly, okay? That means one chance in a number that's followed by 230 zeros, okay? That's millions and millions of times more unlikely than finding one grain of sand that you're looking for in all the grains of sand in the world. It's millions of times less likely than that, okay? And yet the universe exists. So the idea of there being quantum manifestations of the dead in our experience as we die, you're already in the realm of something that's virtually impossible, which is that the universe exists and we're in it. It's almost impossible. So, all right, if you're in for the universe, you kind of have to be in for everything else, right? It's not that outrageous.
That was one of my favorite parts of your book, by the way. I was reading that before we hopped on the phone call, and it gave me the emotional state of I love sleeper trains. It's very difficult for me to relax. I have to do stuff all the time. But when I'm on a sleeper train, I look out the window and I'm like, I don't know, I'm in another country. I'm going 65 miles an hour. Isn't this enough? It's like one of the few, that and camping are the two places I can chill out. So I was reading that paragraph in your book, and you go into great detail of look, if gravity were fractionally less strong, then stars could not coalesce and the universe just wouldn't happen. If it were fractionally stronger, then they'd be too strong and light wouldn't escape them. It'd be a dark universe. And by the end of the paragraph, I was like, man, I'm doing great. Just the fact that I exist right now, I feel like is a great accomplishment of mine. Like I don't have to go jog anymore today. I'm just the fact that I exist at all. Good job, Heaton. Good job.
You're absolutely right. And another way to think of it is the idea of infinity. In an infinity of time, everything must occur. No matter how unlikely, everything must and will occur in an infinity of time.
But do we have, I mean, like you mentioned in the book, the universe is going to eventually have heat death in 14 billion years or something like that. I'll probably be gone by then, but eventually it's going to hit heat death, right? So do we actually have infinity of time? Isn't there a kind of life cycle to the universe?
The universe doesn't, but we don't even know what's around in quotes, around the universe. Like what's the context for the universe? So in an infinity of time, a universe will begin out of nothing, right? And that universe might not be infinite. It does eventually experience heat death, but we're still talking about, so the universe is extinguished. Eventually it reaches 0 Kelvin, but you're still talking an infinity of time. So other things will happen. In fact, they must happen. So, is that God? Well, maybe. I mean, if you want to say God created the universe, you could also say infinity created the universe because everything must happen in an infinity. So at that point, it's all semantic.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And so the universe might reach or will reach heat death, but there's still going to be time which will exist outside of that, or the universe, and then on top of that too, that's presupposing that we're the only universe. It's my understanding that we've sort of worked our way backwards from the multiverse perspective to accommodate the weird probabilities you mentioned earlier. That when they calculate how incredibly improbable it is that our universe exists, the rational explanation people came up with was, well, maybe there's a bunch of universes and they all have different laws of physics, and we just happen to be in the right one. So we're a body of water perfectly contoured around, or we're a puddle perfectly contoured around a dent in the road. So it feels very natural to us, but there's lots of other dents that have different things. So possible that there are other universes that are experiencing other things.
Yeah, I mean, there might be universes with a little bit more gravity, and they're completely dead universes. I mean, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, so yeah, I think the idea is that there's an infinity of universes. So obviously, one includes the parameters that permit existence and life, right?
So scaling back from the big quantum stuff, where I'm very much out of my element for a moment. What do you do with all of this? Like you come perilously close to death. You're kind of on death's doorstep for a week, a month after that. Like, do you wake up and go, wahoo, I'm alive, I'm going to go smell flowers, everything's great. Like what is, how do you cope with that?
It was very complicated. It reminded me of coming back from war, which I've done many times, and that should be an exercise in joyfulness. Like, oh, I'm back in the world, and it's quite crushing. And so I know I wasn't on death's door for weeks or months. I was on death's door for a few hours. But really on death's door, I mean, I'll just sort of say it happened in mid-sentence with my wife, right? I'm not a walking heart attack. I'm a healthy person. I'm an athlete. I'm a runner. And in mid-sentence, I felt a little sort of stab of pain in my abdomen. And that was my aneurysm rupturing. And I was bleeding to death. Starting from that moment, I was losing a pint of blood into my own abdomen every 10 or 15 minutes. And you can afford to lose half your blood before you die. And I was exactly that amount of time from the hospital, right? So it was super, super close. And what freaked me out afterwards, I should have died, right? I mean, the odds of me surviving were incredibly small. And I had dreamed the previous night that I had died, that I was dead, right? So I came out of this with this weird question, like maybe I did die. Maybe this is all a dying hallucination and I'm actually not here. And apparently it's a very, very common paranoia for people who have almost died. And at one point I went up to my wife and I was like, just tell me I'm really here. Like, tell me I survived and I'm here and you see me. And she's like, yes, of course you're here, sweetheart. We love you. You're da-da-da. In my mind, I'm like, that's exactly the kind of thing a hallucination would say to me, right? Like, I'm onto you. I don't believe it for a second, right? And the other paranoia was one paranoia was that I didn't exist and I didn't know it. The other paranoia was that I did exist. I had survived death by very, very small odds, and that it could happen again at any moment. At any moment, I could feel another pain in my abdomen and off I'd go. And there were no medical reasons to think that, but the trauma of being blindsided, not in a war zone. You go into a war zone and a bullet hits a sandbag next to your head. What the hell do you expect is going to happen? That's not traumatic in a weird way. It doesn't violate your sense of the universe, right? This did. I was just a normal day. I was talking to my wife and I felt a pain in my abdomen in the middle of that made everything seem unstable and unpredictable and I could die at any moment and all of us could. And as I say in the book, it's terrifying, but the flip side of terror is veneration. And it made me sort of venerate the moment. Like, this might be my last moment. Make sure you are well here, that you are well present for it, right? Because you just don't know. None of us know if we're going to make it to dinner, right? I don't care how healthy you are, whatever. We just don't know. And so you can be terrified or you can be reverential about this fact that you, at least right now, are experiencing reality. And it's a very unstable, neurotic way to live, but it's a true way to live. And the trick was to dial down the terror and dial up the sort of the reverence for life. And it took a long time to do that. It took a long time to get rid of the paranoia.
Do you think we ought to be more cognizant of death or less cognizant of death? And what I mean by that is my dog Wallace on the couch behind me, I think, he's afraid of loud noises and thunder and fireworks. Like, he has a fear response. I'm confident Wallace does not like stare into the sunset and go, "Oh my God, I'm going to die in 7 years. What happens to me?" I don't think he's thinking about it at all. And he seems to be much happier for it. That he's not concerned with it. He is living in the moment all of the time. So there's and I've met people. My uncle is a very engineer minded guy, and he doesn't care at all. Like, I asked him one time. He telling me long stories about his best friend who was a science fiction writer, and I asked him, if you could have lunch with anybody who's ever been alive, who'd you have lunch with? And he said someone, and I went, "Not your friend?" And he went, "No, I've had lunch with him hundreds of times. I don't need to see him again. He's dead." And he's so matter of fact about it. Just death is like, yeah, clearly it's going to happen. I don't know. It doesn't bug him. It bugs me. So, like, would it be better to contemplate our impending mortality? Would that make us like life more, or would it pull us out of the moment because we'd be thinking about the future?
Well, I think it's quite nice that young people get to live their lives and enjoy their lives without thinking this idea clanging in their head, you're going to die, right? It's like half of marriages end in divorce. But how nice that young people can get married without thinking about that. And half of them are going to get divorced, but at least they had some period of time where they weren't focused on that grim statistic, right? And likewise with being alive. But what I would say is that you don't fully understand you're alive until you fully understand you're going to die.
Okay. All right. So
you take for granted that you're alive. Like, yeah, here I am. I'm on the bus. I'm on a date. I'm surfing. I'm blah, 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 all this. How nice. You're not really understanding what being alive really means until you really understand, not in an abstract sense, but in an immediate, visceral sense, I am going to die. It's going to happen. I'm not special. This is, and maybe it's decades from now, but I am going to die. And you don't really understand it viscerally until you encounter it in some way. I didn't. And I'd been in combat plenty, right? I mean, it's not like I didn't understand that there's dangers out there that can kill you. Of course, I was almost killed a number of times. My best friend was killed, right? Like, but that's different from, whoa, I am going to die. And that's a kind of body knowledge that I didn't get until my late 50s. And I would say that I didn't actually really start appreciating existence until I understood that existence was going to be taken away and could be at any moment. It's not, it's like, fine, I'll probably, I'm a long-lived family, I'll probably die when I'm 90. No. Sorry, you could die within the hour of any hour. So what are you going to do in this hour? You're going to be scrolling through your media feed? How lame, right? Are you going to be, fighting with your wife? No. Like, what? If you could die within the hour at any point, what are you doing with your hour, bro? Like, come on, don't waste it. And that's what I mean by really living.
I've not had a visceral moment of death. I had a thing where I've had a couple of things that in retrospect were really stupid that might have killed me, but I was not confronted with mortality in that moment. Right. Where I'm at is I'm 41, so I've now had a couple friends from high school just die. Like one of them dropped dead from an aneurysm, and he was in better health than me. It happened in 5 minutes. One of them got ALS. So I feel like I'm approaching the end of the warranty on the product, and but I'm only tangentially aware of it. Yeah. And actually, I think the biggest click I had in my head was reading a Robert Heinlein novel 5 years ago where, this is from the 50s, there's a character that's talking about like, well, by the time I'm an adult, they'll probably have cured aging and I won't have to worry about death. And this older character goes, yeah, that's what I thought when I was your age, but here I am, an old dude about to die. And I was like, uh-oh, I think death's probably going to come get me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and you're a kid. I mean, I'm 63, right? So what you do is your idea of young gets very elastic, right? And now for me, young, I include myself in the idea of being young because I'm healthy, I have a good full life, I'm athletic, I function as a young person does. I just happen to be 63. There'll be a point where that's not true, but right now it is, and that's my reality. There's a really interesting. I mean, sometimes people ask me, so has it changed you? Are you a Buddhist, or has it changed your, it definitely didn't make me a Christian. It did not make, I'm still an atheist, right? Okay. And the one thing I don't understand about Christianity is why Christians are so determined to convert atheists to their religion. Like, atheists don't give a shit, right? I could care less if you're a Christian. I'm certainly not going to harangue you about it. Why are you haranguing me? Like, can't you just that's the part of religion I don't get. But in terms of my own sort of like experience of, for lack of a better word, spirituality, I read this extraordinary story about Dostoevsky after I finished my book, or I think it would have been in the book. Dostoevsky, the famous Russian writer, in his 20s, before he was a well-known writer, in his 20s, he was a kind of political radical in the 1840s in Tsarist Russia. And he and his buddy of like liberal friends would get together. They had something called, I think it was called the Petrashevsky Circle. And they would get together and talk about these radical ideas like freeing the serfs, right? And things like that. And the Tsar's police didn't take kindly to it and got wind of this nonsense and rounded them up and threw them in prison, right? And they spent 7 or 8 months in prison. And they weren't particularly worried about it because it wasn't a particularly serious crime. They were just talking about stuff, right? They didn't start a revolution. They didn't do anything, right? They were just kids talking. And then finally, after 8 months, they were let out and they were led into a wagon. They were put in a wagon or a carriage, and they assumed were going to be driven to the court and discharged to their families, right? 8 months, that's probably sufficient. No, they were driven to a city square and tied to posts, and a firing squad was lined up in front of them. And these young men had literally a minute or two to confront the fact that instead of being reunited with their families, they were going to die right now, like right now, right? And Dostoevsky, as the rifles were, were cocked and leveled, ready, aim, in those horrible moments, Dostoevsky, so we know what someone thinks when they're confronted with the abyss like that, because he survived this. It was a mock execution. At the last moment, a rider galloped into the square and said the Tsar forgives them. But they had this moment of facing death unexpectedly, and he said that in that moment, he looked out past the soldiers, and he saw sunlight glinting off a church steeple. And he had the thought, within moments, I will become part of the sunlight. I'll become part of all things. And he also had time to think, if I should somehow survive this, I will turn every moment into a miracle. Every moment into an infinity, not a miracle. Every moment into an infinity. And if I came away from this, what happened to me, it was sort of within that context, right? Like, we're all part of everything, and the more you can make every moment an infinity, the more richly you're going to live, including being stuck in a traffic jam or whatever. It's like, stop, bro. You're not in front of a firing squad. Every moment's an infinity. Like, what are you going to do with it?
On a scale of 1 to 10, how scared of death were you prior to this experience, and where are you now?
Well, you can tell I was scared to death because I refused to think about it, right? And I convinced myself that I'm an athletic, healthy person, and I don't have to think about death for decades. That's how scared of death I was, right? And I'm an older father. Right now, I'm 63. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and so I feel an enormous responsibility, love for them, and responsibility for them, and just a hunger to spend as much time as possible with them, and much of their lives as possible. So I'm scared of death in the sense that I don't want to leave them, right? But I would say I'm less scared of death than I had. I'm less scared of the prospect of dying, of the process of dying. I'm less scared of that than I was before. I realize it's so easy. It's like, I was so close, and I realized, just wait a couple of minutes and it's over, right? Just a half step to the left and you're in the pit and it's done. It's like no big deal. It is so nothing, right? And I didn't have that sense before. It seemed very scary and dramatic and monumental, and like, no, man, it's a half step to the left and it's done. Like, and but now I've got my little girls, and I'm gonna hang on to them for as long as I possibly can.
And it sounds like all of this gave you emotional wisdom it doesn't sound like you got a lot of answers out of this. Like I gather that this has given you lots and lots of questions, but I don't get the impression that you're like, yep, I know what happens to me when I die. I'm going to go this next time when Dad shows up, I'm going to slip into the pit like I'm going to slide at a water park. Like am I reading that right? You're not confident what happens next?
No, I mean, anyone who claims to have answers is not to be taken seriously, right? I mean, I don't think it's a knowable thing. The ultimate reality about the universe and about life and death, I don't think is knowable by the human mind. So if someone claims to know what happens when you die and how the universe was created, they're telling you a story. Like that there's a God in an afterlife is our favorite bedtime story, right? The light's going to get turned out. We're scared and we need a nice bedtime story. Oh, well, there's a God. And when you die, he's going to take care of you. And there's an afterlife and you're going to see all your loved ones. That's a very sweet bedtime story. And we need stories. Humans need stories. I mean, what we're doing, we're alive in a pain-racked life for 60 or 70 years, sandwiched by infinity in a dying universe. Like, that's a cold cup of coffee right there, right? Like, you need a nice story to make that even psychologically bearable. But that's not an explanation. And you know you're in the realm of explanations when you can test it. You can't, and you don't want to test the stories. Please don't test the Santa Claus story, right? Because you'll ruin it. Don't test the God story because you're not going to be able to prove that God exists. Don't test that stuff. We need them as stories, right? But if you want explanations, those are things you can test, right? You can test the theory of the law of gravity. You can test why airplanes fly, et cetera, et cetera. And if so, I didn't propose a theory for what happens when you die in any form that's testable. Preposterous, right? But there are legitimate rational reasons for thinking that we actually don't understand the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness, and what happens when we die, what happens to the individual when they die. There's rational reasons for thinking we actually don't understand those things.
It could be more complicated or deep than just there's matter and that's it. There's matter, chemicals, and infinity, and it's lights out forever. There might be something more than that, and there's rational basis to consider that.
That's right. And I will say that the rational world at the quantum level is subjected to the effect of consciousness. So, consciousness is not a tangible thing, right? It's not like there's a particle, right? And so the intangible, which is consciousness, dictates reality at the quantum level. So right there, you know that the universe is not just a manifestation of physical phenomena.
Well, and on top of that too, like there's so much that we can't know. Like a weird daydream I have when I drive around the car is, let's say theoretically, there's a food you can eat that will give you a headache in the past. If you eat this, you're allergic to it, but there's some weird chronological quirk where if you eat grapefruit, you will have a headache 1 month prior to eating the grapefruit. How would we ever figure that out? I don't like it. It would require such an insane amount of weird inferential leaps to ever be able to come up with a hypothesis that if there were things that went counter to the physics that we've identified, it would be really, really difficult for us to ascertain them. So I don't doubt that there's a lot to the universe we haven't figured out yet. We'll wrap up in a couple of minutes here. Big picture, what does society get wrong about death?
Well, every society tells a story that there's a God and that there's an afterlife. And I'm not gonna sit here and say that that's wrong. How could I possibly prove it's wrong? Right? It's not provable. You can't prove it's wrong any more than you can't prove it's right. I mean, they're both equally unprovable. So it's a nice story. I don't know if they're getting it wrong. Right? What I would say is that it's possible that the experiences that people over the ages have had on the threshold of death, the few that made it back from the high fever, from the embolism, whatever it is, the few that made it back in our human history of 200,000 years of, human brain, human consciousness, the few people that made it back from that threshold might have come back with the visions that I had of the dead. And that might be how this idea got started, because some people came back from this liminal state where like, whoa, I saw my great uncle, right? And that might have engendered some of the first religious thought. Like, oh, there's this whole other parallel universe where everyone who died is in that universe. And this is the waiting room for that, the real thing, right? And so, it's possible that all societies believe some version of that, and I'm not going to say that they're right or wrong, but what happened to me with my father makes me seriously wonder if we were just missing something, and in some sense that whether those societies are kind of right in ways that they could never, ever, ever know or prove, of course.
I'm kind of hoping I'm pleasantly surprised. I tend to set things up to let's go for minimum expectations, and if they get exceeded, terrific. So I hope that when I approach death, your father is there for me. And he's like, hey, do you know Sebastian? And I'm like, yeah, I met him a couple times. Great guy. I really like his books. And he's like, terrific. Listen, we're going to go into the abyss. Don't worry. It's not a big deal. Okay. Then the two final questions for you. I realize this is a difficult one to answer, but do you think that scientists will have a very different understanding of the afterlife or death 200 years from now? Or do you think that this will remain a point of conjecture forever?
No, I don't think it's a question that will ever get answered. I mean, if nothing happens when you die, you could look for a very long time and still not come up with any evidence of anything because there's nothing there, right? I mean, it's possible that the reason we don't know what happens when you die is because exactly nothing happens. And what's the evidence of nothing? Nothing. Like there's just nothing there to discover, right? It's possible. It's also possible that we cannot envision infinity. I mean, our brains cannot envision infinity in an abstract sense. You sort of know what it means. You cannot envision it cognitively, right? And we may not be able to envision what death actually is cognitively. If it's something other than nothing, it still might be something we cannot envision because our human brains. We're social primates. We've been around for like a blink of an eye, 200,000 years. It's absolutely nothing, right? Like why would we think that this brain is capable of understanding the most profound realities of the universe and of life and death? Like what hubris is this, right? So 200 years from now? No, I don't think so. And I'll also, let me just add in terms of an afterlife, the idea of there being nothing sometimes to me is quite a restful idea, right? Like, oh, finally, I get to put my burden down and that's it. I'm done. My work is done, right? The idea of an eternal consciousness that you cannot bail out from, that you are shackled to, not for a long time, not for eons, but for eternity. Maybe, suppose it's painful. Suppose you're sad. Right. Suppose. Or
you're bored. One could think maybe you'd get bored after a few 10,000 years.
Right. I mean, and you can't leave. I mean, this life, for those of the tragic few who find this life so painful that they can't bear it, they can kill themselves. Right. And in an eternity of consciousness, you have no body. Right. You don't have sight because you don't have eyeballs. There is no physical reality to you. Right? You're just a consciousness forever. And thank you, no, right? I mean, I'm not sure I want that. Who's to say you could see, right? Like, I mean, You don't have a body, right? You're physical, like, and it sounds terrifyingly like locked-in syndrome, right? Which is the ultimate nightmare. Like, oh, you're inside a paralyzed body, you can't move, you can't communicate, and you're fully conscious forever until your body finally dies. Lovely. Like that's what people are proposing for an afterlife. And they want me to hope for that. Like, no, I'll take the big nap. Thank you.
Yeah. I had on Jonathan Rauch recently, and he's kind of a similar mindset where he says immortality strikes him as horrible. He's relieved that he will eventually die. He doesn't get the afterlife boner that everybody else has. He doesn't want it. And I've weirdly felt better reading Gore Vidal. Would not have expected Gore Vidal to make me feel better about death. But in Julian, he makes a really salient observation that when confronted with death, there's just something that we find intrinsically offensive, that I will cease to exist. It's like you're depriving me of continuity, but we never feel that way going the other direction. We're never like, you mean I didn't exist for the preceding 10,000 years? I somehow feel robbed that I haven't always existed, it's one-sided. And the other one in Creation, one of the characters is Buddha. He meets Buddha, and Buddha's like, yeah, life is suffering. The goal of it is to obtain enlightenment so you don't exist anymore. I have obtained enlightenment. I'm not going to exist, but you all are stuck here unless you figure out what I've figured out. And I was reading that like, oh, great, I'm ahead of the game. I'm pretty sure it's lights out when I die. So it sounds like I just saved a bunch of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And, finally, I mean, there's a profound point there. One of the most ecstatic experiences on drug trips and in religious epiphanies and in many near-death experiences is the loss of self, the loss of ego, the joining of the individual with the universal. And that, for an ego-driven society, and, ego is adaptive in Darwinian terms, like your identity and your self-interest is crucial to your survival, right? So it's odd that the loss of identity and the sort of being drawn into the universal, that's actually not horrifying, it's liberating and ecstatic. And you see, you see that in many, many different schools of thought, and including in NDEs. And that, to me, again, it's like, wow, it's sort of interesting that all these different things point to the same thing, not as a horrifying loss of your identity, but as a sort of like ecstatic, infinite expansion. And for me, the most hopeful scenario is that there is at death, there is a unity with a kind of universal consciousness that does not require me to individually have an experience of time and my individual identity. That, to me, would be the best of both worlds. You're part of something greater, but you don't have to think about it for eternity, right? Like that to me would be like, that would be the best scenario.
That is a really good point. I think we'll draw down on that one, because that's good food for thought. Like, most of the people that I know that practice meditation with like an intense level are endeavoring to get past their ego and kind of subsume themselves in something greater. The people that I know that have had really kick-ass drug trips kind of report similar things where like they're trying to get to ego death. They want to forget themselves, and that they find that very liberating and very connective and euphoric. And so maybe losing that sense of self and, the wave becomes the ocean is not the death of the wave, but actually something emancipatory.
Yeah. Romantic love. There's a bit of that as well. You sort of merge with this other person in this totally ecstatic way. It's like, usually doesn't last, unfortunately, but at least half the cases it doesn't last. But that's what we all want is not to consolidate our individuality, is to actually break it down and expand into some other greater thing. And so that to me is like, that actually might be what happens at death on some quantum level. Well, bring it on. Like, I'm good.
Wonderful. Well, hey, Sebastian, it has been a pleasure talking to you once again. The book is In My Time of Dying, and I am a big fan. I'm grateful for you coming on the program, and thank you so much.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
That's the show. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Sebastian Junger, for discussing near-death experiences with me. Until next time, I've been Andrew Heaton, and so have you.